Hi everyone, and welcome to this session on how to do empirical cause prioritization research with Luisa Rodriguez. My name's Bridget and I'll be the MC for this session. So we'll start with a 13-minute talk by Luisa, and then we'll move on to a live Q&A session where she'll answer some of your questions. You can submit questions using the box to the right-hand side of the video, and you can also vote for questions to push them higher up in the queue. But now I'd like to introduce our speaker for this session. Luisa Rodriguez is a research fellow at the Forethought Foundation for Global Priorities Research. Previously, she conducted cause prioritization research at Rethink Priorities and the Future of Humanity Institute. She's also conducted cost-effectiveness analysis for nonprofit and government programs, including at Impact Matters, Innovations for Poverty Action, and GiveWell. Here's Luisa.
So I'm going to talk about how I got to be doing this global priorities type research, given my background. I'll also talk a bit about how to identify high priority research questions, questions that will actually change what we think about our priorities. I'll talk about what this research even looks like concretely, and I'll end by suggesting some ways that you can test your fit for this type of work. So a bit about my own background. I went to Carleton College, which is a liberal arts college in rural Minnesota. I majored in sociology, but I also studied a little bit of lots of other things. At the time, I saw global poverty as the most important cause area. When I graduated, I went and interned at GiveWell before starting a master's in international development. And as Bridget mentioned, I now work with Will McCaskill at the Forethought Foundation, where I'm helping Will write a new book on long-termism and doing my own research into how much we should worry about civilizational collapse. So quite a big pivot. Yeah, and a key part of that pivot happened after I joined Rethink Priorities in 2019. So kind of around then, I decided I wanted to try working on long-termist research rather than global development research. I'd been asked to evaluate the impact of a treaty that would ban nuclear weapons for basically any country who signed on. So the question I was trying to answer was, is this the kind of thing that effective altruism, that the effective altruism community should support? I didn't have a very strong understanding of nuclear risks, so my initial approach to answering this question was just incredibly simplistic. It's basically figure out how many people would be killed during a nuclear war, figure out how much this treaty would reduce the risk of nuclear war, and then estimate the expected life saved because of the treaty. So I literally started my work on this by Googling, how many people would be killed by a nuclear war? This question is obviously problematic. A nuclear war between which countries? What kinds of targets might be attacked? What kinds of nuclear weapons are used? I learned that the size of different nuclear weapons differs by several orders of magnitude. I also didn't really understand what types of nuclear war might cause a nuclear winter and why. So I started listing those factors systematically, breaking kind of large questions into smaller ones. So this is concretely, what that looked like. And when you get to detailed enough sub-questions, you can start to find answers. So the question, how many people would a nuclear war kill? Possible to answer. And it just doesn't make sense, the question. But I did find academic papers that use data from earlier nuclear tests to estimate kind of roughly how many people would be killed in the 50 largest cities in a set of 13 countries if there was a nuclear detonation, the size of the one detonated when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. So this is basically how I made progress on a seemingly massive question. But I want to emphasize that I actually had very little relevant background for this work. What I did have was a pretty interdisciplinary background. So my liberal arts degree meant that I'd studied a bit of maths, social science, physical science, and I'd made some very rough cost effectiveness models at GiveWell. But I was able to use that background knowledge as kind of scaffolding on top of which I could build new skills whenever I needed to. So for this project, I used probability and other maths, some physics, some history, some game theory, some statistics, and certainly we need experts too. But one thing I found kind of shocking is just how willing experts are to respond to emails from random people. So it turns out academics actually love it when people are interested in their work, and they're usually very keen for it to get used in some practical way. So as a, just a tip, if you get comfortable reaching out to experts, you can often cash in on their kind of accumulated expertise without getting a PhD yourself. So anyways, after all that, I had a rough sense of what kind of nuclear war might lead to a nuclear winter, which was said to be kind of the most deadly outcome. And I had a sense of how likely such a nuclear winter was, given the most plausible nuclear war scenarios. And I realized that my model didn't actually account for the final step in the argument that nuclear war might cause a famine so extreme that it caused extinction or unrecoverable civilizational collapse. So for example, I didn't know exactly how much the nuclear winter would affect agricultural productivity, or how much mitigation strategies like planting robust crop varieties, or even everyone becoming vegetarians, would help ameliorate the global famine. So this felt really important to me. Like, we're investing a lot of resources in these cause areas, and these questions seemed like questions someone should have thought about. So my initial reaction was to defer to others who'd surely worked this kind of thing out. And I think this is a really common thought in the effective altruism community. I don't see the answer to this very important question anywhere, but what do I know? Surely community leaders have thought of the answers, have kind of thought it through. So my advice is to challenge this thinking. The effective altruism community hasn't thought of everything yet. It hasn't answered every important question, hasn't even thought of kind of all the important questions to be answering. And I've come to think that the feeling, kind of that thought, is actually a great signal for an opportunity to make kind of a real contribution to our community's priorities. In fact, I think we desperately need that type of thinking as a community. So if not, I think effective altruism runs the risk of becoming basically kind of a pyramid scheme of ideas, where the weakly held beliefs of thought leaders are believed to be worked out facts and never explored more deeply. So things that feel like gaps, those might just be really high priority research questions. Anyways, I got to this point in my work on nuclear threats, and I started to feel like the community should just have a much better understanding of how civilization might fare if there were a catastrophe, kind of not so severe as to cause immediate extinction, but possibly severe enough to cause civilizational collapse. So this is what I turn to next. Again, this is an incredibly difficult and complex question. So how have I tried to go about answering it? This depends massively on the question you're answering, but my main pieces of advice for at least the type of kind of empirical research I do are, again, breaking questions down, and especially when the sub-question feels hard, look for lots of different sources of information that can help you answer the question. And then write down your thoughts and put numbers to things so that you can get constructive feedback frequently. So for example, once I broke civilizational collapse questions down, one of the sub-questions I tried to answer was, would society be able to rebuild its critical systems after a global collapse that killed over 90% of people and caused massive infrastructure damage in the countries most likely to be targeted by a US-Russia nuclear war? So in this case, I thought there were a few types of evidence worth looking into. I started by thinking of particularly devastating wars and natural disasters as analogs for civilizational collapse. I kind of had a vague expectation that lots of cities had been wiped off the map after such events, and I thought that maybe that would speak to the difficulty of reconstruction and recovery. In fact, I actually learned that recovery was surprisingly quick in some instances. So just as an example, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima by the US killed 141,000 people and destroyed 69% of Hiroshima's buildings and critical infrastructure. But despite this, power was restored to the rail station and port within a day, and 30% of homes had power within 2 weeks, and all homes had power within 2 months. Yeah, also strikingly, the population reached its pre-World War II levels after just over a decade. So of course, these literatures are glaringly different from the types of catastrophes I was interested in this case, one that was global in scale with unprecedented population losses. So I explored ways that a global catastrophe might differ from a regional one. I approached this in lots of ways, including interviewing experts. I learned, for example, that some experts were worried that if enough people died, you might lose some skill sets that were critical to recovery. So maybe we lose all chemists, for example, and maybe chemists are really important to restoring the kind of critical infrastructure that humanity relies on. Another approach I took was just doing some back of the envelope calculations to understand how important these differences might be. So expanding on the example I just mentioned, I ended up calculating the rough probability that all of the people with particular skill sets would die at different levels of population death, given kind of how rare those skill sets are. And I found that under a particular set of assumptions, there's almost no chance that we'd lose, for example, all the chemists in the world, even at kind of 99.999% population death. Now, there are major problems with the assumptions I made, but at least now we have a very, very, very rough sense of at least like a bound that we can, a lower bound that we can put on kind of the type of catastrophe that might make this, this like consideration really troubling. And then as a final point, I'll reiterate the importance of putting things down, especially putting numbers on things so you can get feedback. So for example, it turns out that I really messed up the maths in this last table, which is a bit gutting. But at least now I'm closer to knowing how worried we should actually be to losing all chemists during a global catastrophe. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, I strongly encourage you to try it out. So 80,000 Hours has a list of open questions I'd love to see answered. You could see if any of them have sub-questions you could spend some time on. I really, really encourage people to write forum posts. I think they give you kind of the best opportunity to write up your actual thoughts on things and get feedback on them. For students, there's also effective thesis. The Forethought Foundation has an undergraduate thesis prize, and Forethought also has grants available for graduate students. You could consider taking a course in a field that's new to you if you are kind of persuaded by the value of the interdisciplinary background. And I just have a bunch of nuclear weapons questions and civilizational collapse questions I'd love to see answered. So you can reach out to me. Here are some of them. These are just a bunch of questions that I meant to answer but didn't or couldn't. And I think these would be kind of a great way to test your fit. Some require advanced degrees, others definitely don't. They just kind of need the right person to spend some time on them. Some of these I think could be papers for an undergrad class or a thesis or dissertations. And yeah, global prioritization is super interdisciplinary. So there are theoretical questions, there are empirical questions to answer in almost field. And I just really encourage everyone, well, not everyone, people for whom this is really appealing to kind of take a stab.
So Luisa, one of the questions we have is around how you determine the judgment of somebody who's an expert. So how do you decide how much weight to give to an expert and to their positions in your estimates?
I thought that was a really good question. First, I wanted to check if you can hear me okay. It looks a bit freezy on my end.
I can hear you, yeah. So I think we're all good.
Okay, nice. Great. So so the question was about how to figure out kind of which experts' judgments to trust and how to weigh that with other evidence. Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I think it ends up being kind of iterative, where I do lots of literature review. I kind of get a sense of something intuitive, like this person seems to say things that make sense. There's also a bit that's just they get cited a lot. So there's like some deferring to the academic community to figure out whose judgment is good and who says useful things. And then I will often reach out to experts to interview them and speak with them. And then again, I get, is it something besides intuition? I suppose not. I suppose it is kind of an intuitive sense of whether someone, I think, seems to have good judgment. And that might be indicated by whether they seem politically biased or whether they seem to have kind of like speak using lots of exaggeration or something. I guess I just think you get kind of signals of whether someone seems like kind of more reasonable or more, kind of has like an agenda or just personal biases, which lots of people have, and I have. But yeah, so then I form a sense of like who the most, kind of trustworthy experts are, and then I do more lit review, kind of digging into their things and people that they recommend. And then I think slowly I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I have a sense of who's in this field. I've talked to most of the people I think are really sensible. And I think by the end, I end up feeling pretty good about whose judgment to trust, which is, a relief, because at the beginning you do start feeling overwhelmed, like there are so many people and I don't know who to believe.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So there's another question here just about your process of breaking up sub-questions. So how do you decide on what sub-questions to have? Is it to do with intuition or something related to how the Google searches come out?
Yeah, that's another good question. So I think what I was kind of getting at in the talk was, I think I might have a big question, and then to the extent that I can tell, I just don't know how to answer it yet, because basically you couldn't Google an answer. There's like no one fact that would answer it for you. I might read about, I guess you do have to read enough about the thing to understand what you would have to Google to then answer it. So what's an example? If my question was, would civilization recover from a nuclear war? I think I do kind of like almost like a factoring of that sentence down. So there's like the nuclear war bit. What does that mean? There are conditions like winter, radiation, like conflict. And then I break those down again and ask questions like conflict. Would conflict affect people's ability to something like survive? And then I break that down even further into possible mechanisms for how conflict might affect people's ability to survive. So maybe it's about resources. So maybe I have a hypothesis that's like, if you are fighting with people, maybe that means you have fewer people and things to like meet basic needs or keep systems going. Or maybe it's about security and safety. So maybe when there's conflict, maybe I have some hypothesis that's like, if people don't feel safe, they don't kind of cooperate and keep systems like agricultural systems going or power grid on. They just maybe don't go to work, or they, So I end up with a bunch of hypotheses, and at some point they start to feel like, well, that's just an empirical question. And someone has probably written on this. Another one might be conflict and, well, anyways, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's starting to get to the point, which is just like, keep going until you find something that you do think you could Google.
Yeah, okay, that seems like a pretty good kind of framework for that. I think in your talk, you mentioned the importance of getting feedback on your work. Yeah, do you have any suggestions of how people can go about doing that?
Yeah, I think feedback is, I go through lots of iterative rounds. So I'll start with people I trust a lot. And that's often just friends of mine that are other fellow long-termists that I think are just sensible. So would recommend starting with friends. These are questions that are really hard to answer and that no one's thought that much about. And so having just other thoughtful people like think about the way you've thought about them can be really good. And then after that, I do just have a lot of luck emailing. I mean, it's not luck. I think academics just really like to be thought of as useful. So I've had a pretty good experience cold emailing experts in a field and asking them to review like the summary of my work, and just asking them to see like, have I gotten anything just majorly wrong? So that's another way. I think there are Facebook groups for EAs doing research. And I think they're actually really, I think people give really excellent feedback just at the kindness or whatever, out of the desire to be altruists on those groups. So I think one is like EA feedback. Yeah, I think those are my best recommendations if you're not doing this kind of professionally. Just reaching out to people. Usually people want to help, and the worst they can do is say no.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good advice. Yeah, that is kind of the worst that can happen. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we've got. Thank you, Louisa, and thank you everyone at home for assisting with us through these technical issues. Louisa has very kindly offered to answer the remaining questions in the chat. So thank you very much for Louisa doing that.
Sure.
But yeah, we should probably unfortunately wrap it up there. So yeah, thanks for joining us and thanks everyone for coming.